He noticed before she spoke the scent that didn't belong to their house, to their life, to him. It followed her in like a shadow that knew the halls better than either of them. A rich, daytime cologne with a clean metallic bite, the kind that clung to the inside of the nose and refused to leave. It sat beside her perfume, threading through it, rewriting her. The front door clicked, and for a breath the apartment felt like a paused film. Every light low, the evening blue pooling against the windows, the hum of the fridge steady like a heart that didn't know it had already broken. "My train got stuck," she said, not looking up. Her voice was small, polite, the kind of careful that comes after a lie has been told so many times it starts to sound like truth. Her name was Liana. Not the kind of name that fits easily into an apology, not a name you yell when something is on fire, a name that should be whispered, something soft you protect. She hung her coat on the same hook she'd used since they moved in, but her hand hesitated. As if the wall might reach out, take it, and accuse her. "I warmed the soup," he said. He was Ravi, 32. A copywriter who liked quiet corners of cafes and the last seat on a bus where he could watch without being watched. He held the spoon like it had suddenly become ceremonial. Might be too thick now. Silence, the kind that makes a home sound like a stage set. She brushed past him, and a ribbon of that cologne trailed after her, slipping into his ribs, anchoring there. It was different from the perfume he bought her last winter, the one with the little velvet bow. This was someone else's signature, someone else's room, someone else's skin. In the kitchen, the overhead light made a clean circle on the table's wood. He had set 2 bowls and placed the napkins on the left because she always moved them from the right. Small habit, tiny choreography. He waited for her to move them again. She didn't. She sat and nodded, eyes on nothing. "How was the pitch?" he asked. His voice sounded normal to his ears and then far away, like it had stepped into another room without him. "Exhausting," she said. She didn't touch the spoon. Her hands were dry, he noticed. The skin around her nails was red, picked. The kind of thing that happens when your mind is somewhere else and your hands try to keep you here. He wanted to ask, "Why do you smell like somebody else?" He wanted to ask it like a surgeon with a steady hand, like he was ready for the answer and knew what to do with it. Instead, he listened to the fridge humming and the radiator ticking itself warmer. In the hallway, a neighbor laughed, 2 echoes. Then the building swallowed it. They had been floating for months now. That was the truer thing. Missed calls turning into missed days, dinner plates that looked like still lifes. A sweater hung across a chair for so long it became a landmark. Love, when it cools, doesn't die. It glazes over. You can still see everything underneath it, but you stop touching it because your fingertips come away cold. "Did you talk to Myra about Saturday?" he asked, shoveling his spoon through the soup. It made a soft, dull sound. "We might not go," she said. "I think I'll be tired." She said it like she had rehearsed the line on the train, practiced saying it without guilt. He nodded. Then he heard it, not a sound. More like a friction in his chest. The moment a story clicks into a shape you recognize even if you've never read it before. The cologne was expensive, relaxed but insistent. He had smelled it once in a hotel bar, the kind with velvet chairs and men who sit with their knees too open. The memory hit like a photograph under a fluorescent light. A bartender had told a joke about a divorce and everyone laughed too loud, like relief. Liana stood and rinsed her bowl even though it was still full. The water ran hard. He watched it. A strand of her hair clung to the back of her neck, and he remembered a different winter, a different sink, when he had come up behind her and kissed that exact place, and she had sighed like home was a thing you could wear. "Long day," she said again, drying the bowl with the dish towel that still had a smear of turmeric from last week. "I'm going to shower." There it was, the soft panic of water. He couldn't help it. His eyes flicked to the hallway where the bathroom light spilled a tired yellow. He looked at the shoes by the door. He looked at the phone on the counter face down, as if it had made a decision all on its own. "Sure," he said. The word felt like a stone in his mouth. The shower ran and the scent grew wetter, warmer, more invasive. He stood in the kitchen and placed both hands on the edge of the sink. The cool steel steadied him. He remembered the day they picked this apartment because the morning light pooled on the living room rug like milk. He remembered counting the outlets and measuring the walls for bookshelves. He remembered telling himself that real love isn't an explosion. It's a calendar you live in. The phone buzzed once. He didn't move at first. He stood there, willing his body to be polite, to be loyal to the version of himself he liked. The shower hissed and then changed pitch as the water settled. He reached for the phone the way one reaches for a glass falling off the counter, not to catch it, but so it breaks less. A message, bright against the dark screen. The name, Cashin. A name with edges, unfamiliar, not in their circle, not in any story they had told each other. The preview was small, one sentence that could be so many things and yet only one, "Still on my skin." He put the phone down very carefully. The countertop was cool. He pressed his palm flat to it as if heat could bleed from him into stone. He He swallowed. He waited for rage. It didn't come. Instead, a quiet, precise grief unspooled inside him, like thread from a spool that had been waiting its turn. The water cut off, his heart tripped. He pictured her wrapping herself in the gray towel, the one with a fraying edge she always meant to replace. He pictured her wiping the mirror and seeing her own face as if it were a stranger's. He moved to the living room and sat on the arm of the couch. The city outside was a soft hush, the streetlight casting a pale stripe on the wall where their wedding photo used to hang. They had taken it down last month to repaint and never put it back up. He told himself it was because of the dust. When she stepped out, steam curled around her like a defense. Her hair was wet and combed straight back. The scent was muted now. It lingered anyway. It had settled into the air like a guest who didn't understand goodbyes. "Hey," he said. He looked at her face the way one looks at a painting that has morphed overnight. Familiar lines, new meaning. "Who's cashin'?" She blinked. She was always quick, always light on her feet with answers. But something slow crossed her features now. Not fear, not yet. An evaluation, a searching for exits. "A client," she said. The word was too clean. It didn't fit in her mouth. He nodded in the quiet way of a man holding a bottle closed with his hand, waiting for the fizz to settle. "He's still on your skin," he said, and hated how steady he sounded. She closed her eyes. Not all the way, like flinching from a bright light. Then she swallowed and opened them again, clear like someone had wiped the glass. "Ravi," she said. His name broke apart. "I'm sorry." He wanted to ask how many times. He wanted to ask where. He wanted to ask if it was just cologne at first, then fingers, then rooms. Instead, what rose in him was a memory of the first time he saw her cry, on a bus after her grandmother's funeral. How she made no sound, how she pressed her cheek to the cold window and took the city in like she might swallow it to stop feeling. "How long?" he asked. The words were quiet, barely air. "A while," she said. "It wasn't supposed to be, it wasn't," she trailed off, the sentence falling apart under its own shame. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." He looked at her hands, no ring. She had started leaving it in a dish by the sink to wash dishes easier. He hadn't asked for it back. He told himself it was small. It wasn't small. Nothing is small when it leaves a mark this clean. "I kept thinking it would stop on its own," she said, walking into the pool of streetlight on the floor, letting it paint her ankles silver. "That I'd wake up and it would be gone." "Did you love him?" he asked. The question made his throat burn. "I don't know what word to use," she said, honest, and that hurt worse. "I felt lighter there for a while, then heavier." He almost laughed, not because it was funny, because he recognized the cruel symmetry. How people walk toward light and then realize it's a mirror and the brightness is just themselves on fire. He stood and the room shifted. The couch, the table, the door, they all seemed to inch away, like a tide going out. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" She took a breath the length of a lifetime. "I planned to stop." He found himself at the window, looking down at their street where a man in a yellow jacket crossed against the light, hands in his pockets, no hurry. The calm indifference of the world felt obscene. He wanted rain, he wanted sirens, he wanted something in the sky to recognize the size of this, but the night kept being night. Behind him, she said his name again, softer. He turned. She looked smaller somehow, the towel a tent that didn't quite fit. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know how to make it untrue." He nodded once. He could feel something inside him settle into a timeline. There would be a before. There would be an after, and between them, this room, this hour, this scent that didn't belong. "Get dressed," he said gently. "We'll talk." She went to the bedroom, leaving tiny wet footprints that caught the light and then vanished as they dried. He stood in the doorway and watched the darkness breathe around their bed. The sheets were still dented from the morning. Suddenly he remembered the almond stain on the pillowcase he had noticed 2 days ago and couldn't place. Shampoo, he'd thought. Or maybe a new foundation. The mind picks the softest answer it can live with. He sat on the edge of the bed while she dressed in the closet, the sliding door a line of mirror that caught his face and sliced it into two men, one who had loved with patience, one who had waited too long to ask the right questions. He realized with a strange, clean clarity that he wanted to save something, not the marriage as it had been, but the person he had been inside it, the man who chose tenderness even when it hurt. She emerged in a loose sweater and jeans, hair damp at the ends. She looked at him like she was approaching an animal she wasn't sure would bite. "I don't hate you," he said. The truth surprised them both. "I just don't recognize the calendar we've been living in." She nodded, eyes filling and then not. She was good at stopping tears at the edge, balancing them there like glass beads. "I can stay at Myra's tonight," she said. He shook his head. The room was so quiet it felt like paper. "No," he said, "we're not running." They sat at the kitchen table again, 2 bowls of soup, now cold, 2 people now finally honest. Words came in small pieces. He asked for dates and she gave him shapes. She said it started as conversation. He did not ask if it ended in hotel rooms. He didn't need to. The cologne answered for her. "Will you see him again?" he asked finally, and a tremor moved through his hand that he folded into his lap. She looked down. When she spoke, her voice was almost gone. I told him it was over today. Today. The word landed like a glass on stone. He saw the sequence. The last kiss probably in daylight, the ride home with the city smudging by, the key in their door, the cologne in their hallway, refusing to stay where it belonged. He stood. She stood too. For a thin second they both moved forward like magnets that hadn't given up hope, then stopped. "Ravi," she said, her mouth unsteady, "please." He lifted a hand, not in anger, just to hold the air between them in place. To measure the distance, to admit it existed. From the street a car horn called and went silent. A thin rain began, so fine it looked like dust in the streetlight. Somewhere upstairs a baby woke and whimpered. Life continued with its ordinary cruelty. He felt it like a slap and a mercy. "Go to bed," he said, voice low. "We'll figure out something in the morning." She nodded, walked down the hallway. Paused at the threshold of their room, one hand on the frame, her head bowed. For a second she looked like a child lost in a museum. Then she disappeared into the dark. He stayed at the table and listened to the rain find its rhythm. He placed his phone beside hers, screens black and mute. Under the light they looked like river stones. He thought about picking hers up again. He didn't. The line between grace and denial is fine and invisible until you cross it. He stared at that line and could not tell which side he was on. In the silence, the cologne lifted in the air, faint now, a ghost of what it had been. He tilted his head back and closed his eyes. He wished for sleep and knew it wouldn't come. In the bedroom, a hinge whispered, a drawer slid, the tiniest sounds of a life being rearranged with care. He watched the doorway, measuring each breath to the sound of the rain. And then, clear as a bell he did not want to hear, another message buzzed against the countertop, one more small neon confession he had not asked for. Night stretched like unspooled tape, thin and shiny and fragile in the dark. The apartment turned into a museum of sounds, the radiator's breath, the elevator cables murmuring, the fridge's steady hum keeping time with a heart that refused to slow. Sleep didn't come so much as hover, a gray shape at the edge of vision. When it finally landed, it left before it warmed the room. Morning had a way of pretending nothing happened. Light cast the same pale squares on the floorboards, the kettle clicked the same way when it reached a boil, and the building's pipes sang their familiar tired song. But all of it felt indecently bright, as if silence itself was overlit. The chair where Liana's sweater had lived for months now held its own emptiness like a memory of a person. The bed smelled like their shampoo and a hotel they'd never visited. Liana moved through spaces as if her body couldn't quite afford to touch anything. We were careful with each other in that brittle way people are after a glass shatters. You step around the pieces, you breathe shallow and name it caution, not fear. We tried to keep sentences short because long ones threatened to break at the middle and spill everything we weren't ready to mop up. The second message from Cashin had read simply, "Still shaking." The words had burned cold, not a confession. Not even a denial, just a proof of life ping from a story I hadn't asked to star in. I didn't answer. It wasn't mine to answer, but it was mine to hold no matter how hot. I put the phone back face down and the countertop felt like ice. The aftermath was not anger like a bonfire. It was a frost that took its time. It crept into habits, into the space between chairs, into the sink where two spoons waited with their mouths open. It made everything quiet enough that guilt could be heard walking down the hall in bare feet. At night, Liana's breathing found a rhythm that wasn't sleep, not quite. A soft pattern interrupted by breaths that paused as though a thought had caught on a hook inside her. Every time the same impulse flickered in me, reach, touch her shoulder, say her name, but the word lodged behind my teeth. Not because I didn't love her, because I did, and because love, to stay love, sometimes has to sit very still and let the cold speak first. The city leaned into rain that week, real rain, not dust under streetlights. Rain with weight, with a sound like pages turning. It made the streets mirror the sky. It made pedestrians reconsider their pace. It made the apartment smell deeper, like old wood and clean soap and the faintest faraway citrus from a candle we hadn't lit in months. Rain was a relief and honest weather. It knew what it was and didn't pretend. She showered longer in those days, the steam thick as apology, towels piling like small surrendered flags. When she came out, her eyes carried that swollen clarity of someone who has cried and also swallowed most of it. We spoke around the edges, work, groceries, the neighbor's new puppy that whined at odd hours, trying out a voice in a strange building. Reality's small hooks keeping us tethered. The traces of him arrived indirectly, like a draft sneaking under a door. A branded matchbook in the pocket of a coat she rarely wore, from a bar on the river neither of us liked because the music was always too loud to make real sentences. A receipt folded with the carefulness of someone who had practiced tucking away evidence, the ink hardly faded. Coffee for two, almond croissant, 2 spoons. I held it like a bird that might bite. put it back exactly where I found it. The past didn't need my fingerprints. Friends asked about Saturday plans and I wrote back with weather. Busy week, rain might keep us in. Myra sent a message to check on Liana, no specifics, just the warmth of someone who can read distance without a map. I typed "we're okay" and deleted "we." Typed "she's okay" and couldn't press send. Closed the chat and placed the phone face down, a small ritual now, like saying amen without believing. I started to move differently. Slower, not from tiredness, but from a deliberate choice to feel weight. The mug in my hand, the tug of the front door as the building's air caught it, the stiffness in my shoulders that no stretch fixed. Emotions turn physical when the mind gets tired. Grief became a stone tucked behind my sternum. Love, a bruise I didn't want to heal too fast in case the healing rewrote the story. I walked more, in the rain mostly. Past the pharmacy with the sweet old clerk who always rounded down the price of chocolate like it was a kindness he could afford. Past the park where small children negotiated with slides using their entire bodies. Past the florist who wrote poems on brown paper and taped them to tulip buckets. The city kept offering its ordinary mercies, like the world trying to distract a child from a scraped knee. Look here, see the dog in a sweater. See the man sleeping upright on the bus with his mouth open. See the bakery girl writing the letter B like a person learning a new alphabet. When I came home, the apartment felt colder even when the thermostat argued otherwise. Liana sat at the table sometimes without her phone, staring at the grain in the wood like maybe there was a story in it that would let her crawl inside and start over. Other times, she cleaned things that weren't dirty. Folded cloth napkins we never used except when people came over. Sorted spice jars by height and then by name and then by the color of their lids. The care of a heart that couldn't find a place to sit. We didn't stop touching entirely. A hand on a shoulder in passing, an accidental brush of fingers at the sink. Each contact like a test of a bridge we didn't trust, both of us listening for the groan of wood, neither of us willing to jump. When we spoke, the vulnerable lines arrived rarely, and then only at night, when rooms decide they've seen enough and offer invisibility in exchange for truth. "I don't know how to carry this without breaking you," she said once, staring at the ceiling. Her voice was thin but not weak, a person calling into a canyon to see if there's any echo left. "You're not that strong," I tried to joke, and the silence after made me realize tenderness and clumsiness share a border. I reached for her hand in the dark, she let me take it. For a minute it felt like prayer, not the kind that asks, the kind that listens. The other man became a shape in the mirror behind us. We didn't say his name out loud. I knew things without knowing them. The specific shade of envy that flares when you pass a certain block and smell a certain bakery and remember a receipt's ink. The way her laughter came out differently on certain days, thinner, like a bell wrapped in cloth. The tremor that lived in my own jaw now, invisible to the world but present in each good night. He wasn't in our rooms, but he was in our breath, a trace element. An irritant the body would eventually encase like sand in an oyster, if given time and gentle motion. I found one of his texts again, days later, after she'd fallen asleep on the couch with the television asking for attention it didn't deserve. Not searching, just tidying, thumbs moving with muscle memory that had turned into a kind of self-betrayal. The older thread was long, not explicit. That might have been easier. It was worse somehow. Slices of hunger masked as talk about books. Lines about the rain that echoed some of the metaphors Liana and I used to trade back when our nights were made of questions and street food, and the future was a big, kind animal we thought would follow us home. Jealousy is not a scream. It's a low-frequency hum that rearranges your furniture. It made me want to burn the apartment down 1 minute, then wrap it in a blanket the next. I didn't reply. I archived. I turned the phone off and set it next to mine like two stones by a river that didn't care about either one. And then I sat in the dark and let the cold in because somebody had to tell the truth to the temperature. Work suffered in that barely noticeable way that gives itself away in commas and missed calls. My copy came back from clients with more red lines than usual, questions about tone and energy, and whether the brand still sounded alive. I could make anything sound alive except myself. At lunch, I ate in silence on a bench under an awning, watching the rain draw lines through the world and thinking about how water is just a mirror that fell apart. I started gathering small, quiet versions of resilience the way children gather stones. Washing dishes slowly until the water went from hot to warm, drying each glass until it squeaked. Folding t-shirts into perfect rectangles as if geometry could forgive what people do. Running a finger along the windowpane where condensation gathered, drawing a line and watching it rejoin the blur. A trace of him appeared in conversation through a mutual friend I hadn't planned to meet. I ran into Arjun at the corner cafe, the one with the chalkboard that lied about the soup being famous. He asked about work, about the rain, about whether we were still planning that weekend away. I lied without choosing to, the lie arriving like a coat draped over my shoulders by a stranger. He nodded and told me about a new design studio a few blocks west, sleek, loud, expensive. A name that made my chest tighten before my mind agreed, Cashin's Studio. He said it offhand, admiring how they painted their name across brick like it was old even when it was newborn. He didn't know our map. He just liked fonts. I walked there later. Rain stopped. The streets wore their wetness with pride like city skin after a bath. The studio's windows were tall and clean, reflecting a sky that had already moved on. Inside, I saw people moving with that confident thrift of motion belonging to those who believe that time is a tool, not a tide. I didn't see him. Maybe I did. Maybe my mind invented his shoulders and then dressed them. It didn't matter. The glass between me and the room felt as thick as all the unsaid things in our apartment. I stood there long enough to make a security guard look twice. Then I walked home with hands in pockets, counting breaths like prayer beads. The grief shifted. It stopped being a raw wound and became a bruise that taught me where not to press. I found myself talking less, listening more not to people but to rooms, to light, to the way the hallway held warmth in the late afternoon, to the rhythm of footsteps overhead, to the small changes in Liana's voice when she said we and when she said I. One evening, a power dip turned the apartment to dusk for 3 breaths. In that soft outage, we both stilled. When the lamps returned, it felt like waking inside a body you recognized but no longer owned. She was at the sink, sleeves rolled, wrists thin in a way that scared me. I walked over and took the dish from her hand, placed it on the rack. She let me. Our shoulders touched. A minute passed, the kind that feels costly and sacred at once. I ended it, she said quietly, eyes on the window where the city made its nightly glitter. I mean it when I say that. I know, I said. I meant it too. The body can tell when a door is shut even if the mind keeps reaching for the handle. But doors remember hands. I could feel the fingerprints left in the wood. He keeps texting, she said. I haven't answered. Today I typed a reply and erased it before I sent it. A breath, twice. Ghost the ghost, I said, because humor is a splint when you can't find bandages. She almost smiled. It broke something small and necessary in me and stitched something else. Both at once. Love is surgical like that. We ate quietly. The rice steamed like a thought that didn't want to become words. The fan turned slowly like time on summer afternoons. When the plates were cleared, she stayed at the table, palms flat against the wood as if steadying it. How do you look at me and not see him? She asked, voice steady in a way that cost her. I do see him, I said, meeting the truth halfway. Like a watermark, but I also see you. Which is worse, she whispered, that you can still see me. The night sat with us, elbows on the table. The city inside our windows was a soft chorus, nothing urgent, just proof of life. I wanted to say the heroic thing, the sentence that functions like a rope from a helicopter. Instead, I arranged the salt and pepper and realized survival is made of quiet gestures that look like nothing. Days turned into a kind of practice, the practice of not picking at scabs. The practice of answering only the question that's been asked. The practice of letting light mean light and not symbol, yet symbols insisted. The empty room that used to be our office held a loneliness that matched me perfectly. The rain came back midweek as if to emphasize a point I hadn't missed. Even the morning light took its time, arriving in thinner stripes as if unsure whether it was wanted. Then on a Thursday that smelled like old books and damp wool, an unexpected message arrived, not from him, not from her, from someone else entirely, a number I recognized but hadn't saved. The sort of text that changes a room's temperature without asking permission. It was a photo, low resolution, taken hurriedly. Liana sitting at a corner table in a small cafe, her hands around a mug, her face tilted in the exact way it turns when she's listening to something difficult. Across from her, only a sleeve and a wristwatch made it into the frame, sleek, familiar, the kind you notice once and then always. The caption was brutal in its simplicity. You should know. My breath left me. Not because I hadn't believed her when she said she ended it, but because the past has a way of taking one last lap while you're busy lowering your fists. The timestamp was from 2 hours earlier. The cafe was 3 blocks away. The rain had stopped just long enough to make sunlight look like a trick. I stared at the image until the pixels blurred and the scene became shapes. Light, dark, a face, a watch, a room that might have been any room. The floor under my feet felt less certain in the way that isn't quite dizziness, more like the earth considering its options. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen like a polite cough. In the bedroom, a drawer closed with a sound that had already become part of the apartment's vocabulary. Liana was home. The door eased open, the same way it had that first night when the scent of someone else walked in before she did. She stepped into the room, hair damp from rain that had started again without consulting either of us. She saw my face, then the phone in my hand, then the small tremor in the air between us that wasn't a breeze. Her shoulders lowered fractionally, not in relief, in acceptance. "We need to talk," I said, the words simple and heavy and shaped like a table. Her lips parted, then closed. She nodded once. The city hummed. The fridge answered. The rain tapped its knuckles on the window like a patient guest. "What is it?" she asked, and there was a steadiness in her voice that told me she already knew the outline. I turned the phone around and placed it between us, screen alive, the image still bright enough to sting. The room held its breath the way small rooms do when they're about to witness something they would rather not. Her eyes were calm and full of storm at the same time, like water seen from a boat. She didn't reach for the phone. She didn't look away. She only said softly, "That's not what it looks like." Then the kettle, which had clicked off a minute earlier, let out a last thin whistle, as if the apartment itself couldn't stand the quiet, and everything held in our chests leaned forward together, waiting for the next inch of truth to arrive. It wasn't what it looked like, that's what she said, but the room still changed shape around us, like a lung after a hard sprint, needing to learn how to breathe again. We stood with the photo between us, pixels and guesswork, and a clock that wouldn't take a hint. The rain pressed its face to the glass. The kettle gave one last sigh, and then the silence made its slow, deliberate circle. "Talk to me," I said, and my voice surprised us both. It wasn't angry, it wasn't soft. It sounded like a floorboard that had held a family for years and could hold a little more. She pulled a chair back and sat at the table as if the act might be interpreted as confession. Fingers flat. Shoulders squared in the gentle, impossible pose of someone who has run out of disguises. She didn't reach for the phone. She didn't deny the shape of the scene. She just breathed long enough to steady what trembled. "I met him to end it," she said. "Not with words over a screen. Not with the kind of ending that invites answers I can't survive. I needed to see his face when I said it." I let the words find their weight on the table. Their gravity was clean. The image remained between us, all glare and suggestion. I said nothing, which is sometimes the only way to hear the whole truth. "It was quick," she continued. 15 minutes, maybe. I told him it was wrong that I made you a house where shame lived in every drawer. He said he understood. He didn't. That's why I left." "And the look?" I asked, touching the photo with one fingertip, not quite touching the moment, "in your face." "Listening," she said. To the echo of my own bad decisions, to the person I was in that room, saying goodbye to her too. The apartment settled, heat ticking in the pipes, like old bones stretching. Her hair was damp from rain, the ends leaving tiny dark commas on her sweater. There was no cologne in the room now, no ghost scent to fight, just soap in this ordinary air and the shape of us. "I'm not asking for absolution," she said, almost a whisper. "I'm asking for an exit that doesn't set the building on fire." Some part of me wanted to open a window and let the rain choose for us. Another part, the quieter one, counted breaths and cups and all the unglamorous ways people go on living when the story goes crooked. I took the phone back, locked it, placed it face down, the stone ritual. "Okay," I said. We made tea the way disaster relief workers hand out blankets. Practical, unsentimental, knowing warmth isn't an answer, but it keeps the questions from shaking you apart. We sat with mugs, steam fogging our thoughts just enough to make the edges humane. "Why him?" I asked, and hated the childish need I heard beneath it, the one that wanted the universe to classify pain neatly. She stared into her cup as if letters would form. "Because he felt like a door," she said, "to a life where I wasn't tired of myself, where I wasn't careful with every word." He laughed at the first version of a thought. "You began to hear my drafts as indictments." The sentence landed, not as blame, as whether truth can be cruel and still be weather. I nodded. Memory rolled in, all the edits I'd made to her mid-sentence, like a proofreader who mistook ink for blood. The way I'd prized precision over presence, that wasn't why she crossed the line, but it didn't help her stay on our side of it. "We broke," I said. "We frayed," she answered. And I pulled at the thread. We let the tea cool until the cups wore their halos. The city outside was all brake lights and permission. She turned her face toward the window, and for a second I saw the young woman on the bus after her grandmother's funeral, the one who pressed her forehead to the pane and silently tried to make a covenant with sorrow. "Take everything but spare the last, smallest name for joy." "Did he ask you to stay?" I said. "He asked me to rethink," she said. "He said I was making a moral performance." She gave a thin, humorless smile. "He liked me better in shadows." We fell into a kind of talking that isn't debate, where each answer opens a little room and neither of you rushes to fill it with furniture. She told me small specifics, not the lurid kind that injure without educating, but the kind that let me calibrate reality. Which cafe, which hour, which song on a taxi radio that made her cry in a way the driver pretended not to see. I asked what she missed about us. She said the way my hand found her back in crowded places, that quiet choreography. I asked what she grieved. She said the day our laughter began to check itself before leaving the mouth. That night she didn't sleep in our bed. She went to the office that had become an echo chamber of unpaid attention and lay on the couch with a throw blanket. I lay in our room, eyes open to the streetlight's long band on the wall, the stripe that had once illuminated a frame where we promised something we both meant. I listened for her breath through the door, fragile waking true. Morning arrived as if it had been told not to raise its voice. Pale light sifted through the curtains, the kind that makes a room feel like it's waiting to be chosen. The apartment smelled like the aftertaste of rain and bread warming in a toaster. I stood in the doorway to the office. She was awake, eyes open, hands folded over her chest like she was holding the idea of herself in place. "Coffee?" I asked. She nodded, sat up slowly as if a new gravity had been installed in the night. We stood at the counter, two people performing a choreography they'd learned years ago and were now testing for stability. Milk, sugar. The slight lift of the kettle as it spills. I handed her a mug with a chip in the rim, the chip we joked made it honest ceramic. She held it with both hands like a small warmth she had to earn. "Are you staying?" I asked. Not with an edge, with a clarity that wanted to know which way to turn the chairs. "I don't know," she whispered. "I can't take from you the part that's still bleeding. I don't want to be the reason your house smells like smoke for years." Her eyes shone without pride. "But I also don't trust myself not to run from the guilt if I leave." I sipped. The coffee was too strong. I let it be too strong. "Then maybe we don't decide today," I said. "Maybe we decide how to stand in a room again without breaking it." She nodded once, grateful and bereft. We ate toast like people at a wake, respectful of crumbs. The silence wasn't empty, it had a pulse. We cleaned the plates. We didn't touch. In the afternoon, she left for a walk without saying where. I watched from the window as she stepped into the slow light, shoulders squared against a wind that wasn't there. I sat at the table and opened a notebook, drew a line down the middle. On the left, words I associated with us. Winter soups, trains, green glass, the smell of old books, the second laugh that always followed the first. On the right, words I associated with the last months. Missed calls, draft emails, gray towels, hotel bar lighting, the disciplined sigh of someone who's learned to hide a tremor. The page looked like a border crossing. I closed it. She came back before dark, carrying oranges and a bunch of eucalyptus she said was for the bathroom, because the steam would make it smell like a forest that forgives. The gesture felt like a small, stubborn prayer. We hung the branches on the shower head together, and the scent, when the water ran later, did feel like a door into air that hadn't been used. We talked in softer rooms the next days, in the small corridor where socks go missing. On the rug where sunlight pooled in the morning with an innocence that embarrassed us. In the lobby while waiting for a package, the courier said he left and didn't. Ordinary places, immune to metaphors, or so they claimed. Each conversation nudged the furniture of our hearts a few inches toward or away from something neither of us could name. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked one evening, in the quiet that lives between a TV's "Are you still watching?" and the answer. "I kept waiting to become the person I promised you I was," she said. "Then I kept waiting to become the person who could tell you I wasn't." The honesty was not a knife, it was a key. It didn't unlock anything grand. Just a small interior door where I kept the habit of punishing myself for not predicting earthquakes. I opened it a crack. The room smelled like dust and mercy. We began to move like people who might survive each other. We made a list on the refrigerator, small things, commitments that didn't pretend to be vows. No answering phones after midnight. No leaving without saying when to expect a return. No negotiating inside the bedroom. No lying to protect the other person's version of you. We signed our initials next to nothing. We let the list live there until it learned our names. And then, like all weather patterns that think they've been understood, life turned. The turning wasn't dramatic. It arrived as a knock, 3 small knocks, at 9:07 p.m. on a Tuesday. I opened the door. Liana was standing in the hallway with a suitcase I hadn't seen in months, the blue one with the scuffed corner, and a face that had erased all its makeups. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like a person who had rehearsed a line and decided not to deliver it. "Can I come home?" she asked, and the word was both place and verb, and yes, home. The syllable creaked. The apartment behind me kept its neutral hum, unwilling to help. She stepped in without waiting for an answer and set the suitcase down gently, like she didn't want to wake the floor. The zipper tab clicked against the handle in a way that broke my heart, a little precise and final. "I ended it," she said again, but this time her voice had lost the courtroom and found a chapel. "And I ended the part of me that thought I deserved the shortcut." She stood very still, hands at her sides. It felt suddenly important not to touch her. Not yet. Touch is an author. It writes ahead of consent. I closed the door quietly. The rain had come back. The eucalyptus in the bathroom released its clean breath. "Sit," I said, and I heard the dignity in my own voice like a rail finally hammered straight. We sat on opposite edges of the couch, like cliff climbers calling across a narrow gorge. The city gave us its usual music, distant horns, late laughter, a bus exhaling. Her eyes were red at the rims, not from crying, but from being held open too long to watch a life not worth keeping. I don't want to plead a case, she said. I don't want mercy as a trophy. I want the work. Whatever it looks like, even if the work is learning how to leave the right way. I don't want to punish you, I said, and felt how true it was, how costly and how clean. I want to live somewhere that uses the same calendar as my heart. We let the words arrange themselves, unstacked, humble. She told me she'd been sleeping at Myra's and then at her mother's and then not at all, mostly. She told me she had deleted numbers, blocked the one that needed blocking, wrote a letter she didn't send, and then burned it in a sink like a teenager because fire looked like a thing that could carry weight away. She told me she had walked past the river and made a promise to the water that she would only tell the truth even when it made her unattractive. I told her that I had found the part of myself that had grown comfortable with her distance, and I had sat with it like a child until it fell asleep. I told her I had stopped looking for proof that I should be angrier than I was. I told her I had started reading old emails we wrote each other in the year when everything was new, not to hurt myself, but to remember the architecture we once trusted. The rain tightened its pattern, the eucalyptus kept breathing, the light leaned warmer the way it does when a storm stops threatening to prove a point. We were quiet for a long time, and in that quiet our breaths found the old duet, cautious then faithful. "Where do I sleep?" she asked, not a test, not a seduction, not a demand. I looked down the hallway. The bedroom was a room with a memory and a bed with two sides. The office was an apology with cushions. The couch was a neutral ground that had hosted too many truces. I could hear the years ahead shifting their weight, waiting for the first step. "You can stay," I said, and the words were careful, each set down like glass. "But just for tonight." Morning found us like a promise spoken softly, the kind you can't quite hear until the light arrives and writes it on the walls. The room was pale and patient. The curtains lifted a little and fell back, a quiet breath. The city took its time waking, and the silence felt earned, like a bill finally paid. She slept on top of the covers, shoes by the door, jacket folded on the chair like she was respecting the house. I lay on my side, not watching her, just listening to the small mechanical symphony of a life in working order. The fridge ticking, the fan coasting down, the pipes remembering heat. There was no cologne in the air anymore. Just eucalyptus from the bathroom and the dry, clean scent of morning. It felt like forgiveness had walked in and decided to stand in a corner, not interrupting, not demanding its due. Sunlight crossed the floor in thin bands and turned dust into constellations. She stirred, the old duet returned, inhale, exhale. My heartbeat learned its old steps and for a second tried to celebrate, then it remembered. It slowed into a steady clarity, the rhythm of a person who had decided that kindness doesn't have to mean staying. She turned her head. Our eyes met the way two people pass each other on a quiet street and know everything that needs knowing. We didn't smile, we didn't look away, we let the light do the talking. It said, "This is what survives the night." "Coffee?" I asked. My voice came out even rinsed. She nodded. "Please." In the kitchen, the kettle warmed like a small star. Mugs on the counter, the chipped rim, the spoon that always rattled a little because its handle was slightly bent. The ritual remained, but it no longer felt like a pact. It felt like two people honoring a shared language before choosing their own. We stood side by side. Steam rose. Eucalyptus breathed a clean note through the apartment and made the room feel taller. She wrapped both hands around her mug, the way she did when cold mornings needed proof of care. I could see the tremor in her fingers and also the steadiness beneath it, like a river under ice. "Did you sleep?" I asked. A little. She looked toward the window, where sunlight offered the brick across the street a gentle compliment. I dreamed of the old rug, the green one we sold. We laughed in that dream. "It was a soft. We used to eat on that rug," I said, "on the floor like we were saving chairs for a better day." She breathed out a thin smile. "We were. We let the quiet do its work." It stitched the night to the morning with thread too fine to see and too strong to break. The house made small, approving sounds. A neighbor thumped up the stairs, and a dog downstairs shook itself into a day it didn't doubt. "I meant what I said," she whispered, "about the work, about wanting truth more than a version of me that wins." "I know. I can stay," she said, careful, like setting glass on glass. "I can leave. I can do either well for you. I won't ask you to carry me through the part that belongs to me." I looked at her hands, no ring, pale line where it lived, a geography of absence. I remembered how many doors we had opened together and how many we had closed without noticing the click. I remembered the first time she fell asleep on my shoulder on a bus and how the city felt safe because it knew our names. I remembered the scent in the hallway the night it all changed, and the river of silence that followed, and the fact that I loved her in both scenes, the one where we were new and the one where we broke. "I'm tired," I said, not as a complaint, as a measurement, and I'm also grateful that we told the truth, that we stopped naming smoke light. Yes, she said, the words shone a little not from joy, but from being clean. We washed the mugs, we didn't dry them. They stood by the sink like two small, useful things that didn't need anyone's permission to be simple. The morning widened. The street grew busy in a way that never turns into noise if you let it be distant. We walked through the apartment together, straightening in silence, folding the blanket on the couch, setting the pillow square, pulling back the curtains an inch more, inviting the light to make itself at home. In the hallway mirror, we were two people who had stood in a storm and learned how to move without borrowing thunder. In the bedroom, she paused at the threshold, as if asking the room if it remembered her in a way that didn't hurt. The sheets held their night shadows. The closet door was half open, showing the corner where our winter coats waited for a season that always keeps its promise. She didn't go in, she let the doorway be enough. "Will you be okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and the word didn't wobble. "Not today, but yes." "I want you to have the morning," she said. "You deserve the kind of quiet where your name sounds like yours again." I nodded. "And you deserve a sky that doesn't ask you to explain your weather." She closed her eyes, opened them. An apology passed between us without language and without insistence. We left it there. The good ones know how to stand on their own feet. In the doorway near the blue suitcase, she picked up her jacket, then set it down again. "May I?" she asked, glancing toward the eucalyptus. "Take it," I said. "Hang new branches. Let your rooms smell like air you can trust." Her smile found the corner of her mouth and stayed there, small, qualified, real. "You always made ordinary things feel like invitations," she said. "Maybe that's all we were ever supposed to be for each other," I answered. "Invitations to the best rooms inside ourselves." She slipped into her jacket. The zipper climbed carefully, the metal teeth meeting in a truce. She lifted the handle of the suitcase. The scuffed corner winked under the sun. She turned to me fully. No arms reached, no choreography resumed. We stood still and let the light draw our outlines on the floor like children making paper figures. "Thank you," she said, "not for permission, for not turning punishment into purpose." "Go gently," I said. "Take the long way if it helps." We walked to the door. The hallway held its cool building smell, paint, soap, old wood, the faint iron of many keys. She looked at me like a person in a station who doesn't ask for a train schedule because she already knows the platform. We were not broken in that moment. We were finished. There is a difference. She stepped into the hall. Suitcase wheels hummed once across the threshold's metal strip, a small farewell song. She paused, almost turned back, didn't. The doorframe offered its usual rectangle of decisions. She stood inside it one last time, a figure cut from the years we shared, outlined by a light we had chosen together. "Goodbye, Ravi," she said, using my name like a benediction. "Goodbye, Liana," I said, not asking it to mean more than it did. When the door clicked, the apartment reassembled itself around the sound. The light took a step forward. The air changed register by half a note. I rested my forehead against the wood, felt how it held. Tears arrived and did their work without spectacle. Grief emptied its pockets as neatly as a guest who means to come back as memory, not as a ghost. In the bathroom, the eucalyptus hung and breathed. I stood under the shower for longer than usual, and the scent rose like a forest teaching the city a different way to name itself. Water found my neck, my shoulders, my back. It asked nothing. It rinsed what it could. I thought about every room we had shared and every room we had denied each other. I thought about the way morning light forgives without forgetting. After I opened the windows. The cool slipped in and touched everything lightly, like a friend late to the party who still knows where the glasses are. I made eggs I didn't finish. I wrote her name on a small piece of paper and folded it once, then again, until it was a square that fit my palm. Then I unfolded it and wrote mine beside it, let the two names sit together in daylight. After a while, I tore the paper along the crease and kept both halves. Some things you don't divide to throw away. Some things you divide to understand their shape. I walked the rooms and put the smallest parts of our lives back where they belonged. The scarf on the chair, the book on the sill. The bowl we kept keys in, emptied and wiped clean. I lifted our old green rug in my mind and set it down in a memory that didn't make me bleed. I sat on the floor, cross-legged like the early days, and listened to the apartment be a place again, not a verdict. By noon, the city had grown loud enough to be ignored. A beam of sun found the wedding photo we never rehung, still leaning against the bookshelf, glass dusty, our faces younger and unsuspecting. I didn't put it back on the wall. I didn't hide it either. I wiped the glass with the sleeve of my sweater and set it upright on the shelf, a witness among other stories, not a judge. Phone on the table. No new messages, the small relief of an uncluttered silence. I opened a notebook and drew a simple list, not for survival, for living. Call my mother, return the library book, fix the cabinet hinge, buy flowers for the table, walk by the river, breathe on purpose. I wrote breathe on purpose twice. It felt right. In the late afternoon, a soft rain came back as if the sky had decided to walk me to the corner. I took an umbrella and left it closed, let the drops find me in the quiet, the way a familiar street reminds you that you have a body, that it has weight and weather. Pedestrians hurried, a child jumped both feet into a puddle and screamed joy like a cure. A man in a yellow jacket crossed against the light with the same careless grace as the night I learned everything. The world kept not asking for permission, and it felt like freedom. At the river, the water had that dull pewter sheen that makes the city's buildings look older and kinder. I stood with my hands on the cold rail and watched a ferry slice the surface without apology. The wake widened and then forgot itself. I thought about the 4 rooms of our story, the hook and collapse, the aftermath and the other man, her return, and this quiet exit toward a door with no lock, and realized none of them were chapters. They were seasons. You don't write seasons, you live through them. You carry the smell of rain into the next room and it becomes part of you. When I got home, the apartment welcomed without ceremony. The towel on the radiator held its shape. The cups by the sink had dried into clean circles. I set my umbrella in the corner, leaned it slightly, the posture of a person who intends to remain. I sat at the table where all our truths had learned to sit without collapsing. The air was still, the light was honest, and the quiet inside my chest was not empty. Sit without collapsing. The air was still, the light was honest, and the quiet inside my chest was not empty.